I think Nikolai is a class traitor. Controversial. Anyways.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Literary Liberation Podcast. Today we will be discussing, analyzing, and reviewing the Shadow and Bone trilogy by Leigh Bardugo. For more content outside of the podcast, please check out our Instagram and TikTok at Literary Liberation and Twitter at LitLibPodcast. I'm your co-host, Mariah. You can find me at Hungry Riot on all social media platforms.
And I'm your other co-host, Kristen. You can find me at KRXXPXN on all social media platforms. Moving on to Shadow and Bone, the trilogy. I guess I will give a warning. We are specifically only talking about the Shadow and Bone trilogy, even though there are more books within the Grishaverse. Since I personally have read them all, I thought it would be better if we split them up into more in-depth episodes. Why did you brush your hair?
Just my bangs.
It's just so but anyways, I thought it would be more digestible if we split it up into like the individual sections for like Shadow and Bone, Six of Crows duology, and the King of Scars duology, instead of just doing like all of the Grishaverse at once, because it kind of focuses on different sections of the world at different times throughout all of these different trilogies, even though they do kind of take over like the overlapping of, I would say, 10 years or so, give or take a few years, you know. So we are splitting them up. Mariah has read the King of Scars, has not read the King of Scars duology, but has read Six of Crows duology and Shadow and Bone.
I am going to read the other one,
Yes.
but I'm gonna wait, I think, until Kristen starts it, and then we can do
my
a buddy
reread.
read.
My reread of it.
Kristen's reread, and we'll do a buddy read on Storygraphs, so we will be able to track
our distinct thoughts.
I think our thoughts a lot easier than when we tried to do it with Babbel, because I think this will be significantly easier.
Yeah.
Because we used to do that with most of our books.
We
have fallen off.
We did used to do a lot of buddy reads. Apparently last year, my Storygraph said that like 33% of the books that I read in 2023 were buddy reads. So that means 33% of the books I read, you also read.
What can I say?
But I
Even though I think most of them were the books that Kristen recommended.
Yeah. Well, because I feel like we don't read a lot of the same stuff.
Yeah. Period.
Like we have, I mean, like, even though like we both read like fantasy a lot, I read a lot different fantasy than what you read personally, and then like fun and things like that. You read a lot more.
I got really into the Rubyverse. It was like a moment.
I feel like even in general, you read a lot of like the Rubyverse, or not the Rubyverse, the romantasy like section of book-tok. That's kind of like more in your wheelhouse, where I'm reading more, I don't know, like general fantasy, I guess.
I think so. I read what book-tok says, and then.
But this series is actually a book-tok series. Like this is,
which is pretty crazy because I never saw this recommended on Fantasy book-tok. But I think it's because it got really popular around the time that you were really getting back into reading. So I think people just don't recommend it as much anymore. Okay,
I actually read it before. Like I read this series first in 2022. I really started my reading journey again in 2025. I was already reading before that, but I actually only wanted to read because of the Netflix show. I saw that the Netflix show had a lot of good reviews, and I was like, well, I want to read it before, and then I really fell in love with this series. Like, I think book-tok popped off with this, even though comparatively, comparing this series to Leigh Bardugo's other two series, this is like, I'm not going to say hot garbage because I love it, and it's like, it does a lot for me personally and what I enjoy in my fantasy, but comparatively, I can definitely see how people can view this as a weaker part of the series rather than Six of Crows or the King of Scars duology, which I think the King of Scars duology is underrated. Nobody talks about that, ever. It's always Six of Crows. Which, yes, I love Six of Crows, but King of Scars has my heart.
I think it's probably because you wouldn't be as inclined to read it because it is like a spin-off of Shadow and Bone.
Mm-hmm. And you do have to read Shadow and Bone.
I don't think you have to read Six of Crows, really. I mean, there's like a little bit,
You
right,
do
with
have
one
to,
character.
well, because Nina is she's one of the main characters in King of Scars as well. Like, her point of view is also, because, so Shadow and Bone is written from first person's perspective. You only get Alina's thoughts, her actions, how she interprets other people's actions. I pronoun, you know, like, it's very much first person's perspective. Six of Crows and the King of Scars duology are both third person limited perspectives, where each chapter a character is prioritized for that character. So like, and like, instead of the chapters being numbered, like in Six of Crows, Kaz will have a chapter, Jesper will have a chapter, Matthias will have a chapter, Nina will have a chapter, and then the same thing in King of Scars. But it mostly follows, I want to say, Nikolai, Zoya, and Nina, which Nikolai and Zoya are very important in the Shadow and Bone. And I think Zoya is also mentioned. Is it?
Yeah, it's in the second one.
Yeah.
You actually do get like a cameo. Like, she's referenced throughout that one, but
Yeah, because with
a
Nina,
moment.
she was in school during the Shadow and Bone trilogy. She's like the main heartrender for the Six of Crows. So since she was in school, not relevant at all.
You consider this like an academia, like a dark. I know it.
Not at
You
all.
think in
No.
modern book-tok tropes, would it be labeled as like dark, like academia, dark academia?
I don't think it would be academia, really, because the schooling element is only focused on in Shadow and Bone, really, and even then, it's a minuscule amount comparatively to like the series overall. Like, I mean, it's like if,
Let's give like a TLDR summary of this for people who are maybe who've never heard of this. I would be surprised if you didn't heard of it, because
I feel like
it has what 1.5 billion views on the hashtag Shadow and Bone, so it's very
15
popular.
billion
But
views is a lot. I mean,
a
comparatively
no
to like,
spoilers summary.
I
Of
wrote
what
one
this is
out
about.
actually. Under
Did
this,
you?
yeah,
You wrote that yourself?
I wrote that myself.
Okay, pop off.
Well, I actually didn't know what I should. Did you read it? Like the last sentence?
No.
Wait, the last sentence, I didn't know what to put for the last P, because I had like a little like alliteration thing going with the P's. I put prayer, but I was also thinking passion. So if you think passion is better, I'll change it to passion. I just thought it was cute.
I don't know. I feel like the religious element is. I think
That's
prayer
what I
is
thought.
sufficient.
Okay, so this is what I wrote personally today after I just finished my reread of Ruin and Rising like an hour ago. It's still fresh on my mind and fresh in my heart. And I love this series. But anyways, so this series follows Alina Starkov, the Sun Summoner, who is living in a Tsarist Russia-inspired country of Ravka. Her unique power intrigues the interests of the Darkling, another Grisha with a one-of-a-kind power. From being a nobody orphan to one of the most powerful beings in the world, she must navigate this new land of politics, power, prayer.
That needs to be the summary on Goodreads.
Yeah, I'm like, I like read like the other summaries of it and kind of like reworked it and stuff like that. But I mean, basically the first Shadow and Bone, it's like your typical like YA novel where it's like the chosen one is thrust into like a new world that they don't really have any experience in or anything like that. And I think it's a very typical YA for pretty much the whole series, but I think that's what makes it work so well, in my opinion, because I love like young adult novels and like general, like Harry Potter I was a big fan of back in the day whenever that was like big. Percy Jackson I was a big fan of. I mean, I was just like eating those chosen one stories up.
I think if I had known about this, because I don't think it came out when I was in high school.
It came out in 2012.
Did it really?
The first book.
So I was like a junior in high school.
Yeah.
So I mean, I may have picked it up and read it, but this when I was like a junior in high school is like when everyone was reading the Hunger Games and stuff.
That was middle school.
It just like wasn't. I was over it. Like whatever, moving on.
You thought you were too cool for the Hunger Games.
I was too old. I was too old for all of this. So, but looking back, I probably would have really enjoyed this.
I know, I definitely would have, which is crazy that I didn't even hear about this until like 2022-ish. But I feel like even then, I didn't feel like hear about Shadow and Bone. I always heard about Six of Crows.
Sorry, I had to do lollipop payment.
The lollipop tax.
I gotta keep these.
It's like the Phantom tax. You even know what that is?
I know it from the song.
The song?
Yeah. What is it? Oh shit, now I can't think of it. It's that skippity, right? It's like...
Who sings it?
It's like a TikTok audio.
Wait, I don't know. I don't know which audio you're
No.
talking about. Not specifically. No. Well, because there's one that me and Tyler.
Getting out your tongue for the
Oh,
Rizzler.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
so
yeah, yeah, yeah.
it's so
Oh,
Phantom Tax, but I
they
don't
say
know.
Phantom Tax in that one? Well, because,
Yeah, I don't.
do you know Curtis Connor?
Curtis Connor, yes.
Yes. Well, because he did one that me and Tyler do a lot where it's like, since you've been got, I can riz for the first time. I'm so livy done. But, like, that's the one we sing a lot. And, like, there's, like, a Phantom Tax line in that. But it's something to do with, like, some streamer, from my understanding, where he streams and then, like, his friend comes in and if he's eating food, he takes some of the food and that's the Phantom Tax.
I would have never known that, if I'm honest. I thought
Tyler
it was
told
like a
me.
Roblox thing.
No, Tyler told me
Oh
what
my
it
God.
was. So I was like, oh, okay. I don't care. But,
Anyways.
moving on from, whenever which is crazy, because I feel like I read a lot in, like, middle school, too, but I just feel like nobody talked about this from, like, where I was at and, like, what I read and things like that. Like, you know? I feel like I'd never heard about this until basically the Netflix show came out.
Same. I didn't know who Leigh Bardugo was.
Which, yeah.
And I didn't even know about, like, the show until you said that there was a show. You're just like, you should read this. I knew literally nothing about this.
I know, I didn't either, but I didn't even see people, like, recommending Shadow and Bone. Like, I saw people recommending Six of Crows more than anything, which is true. Six of Crows is the better series, like, objectively, but the series is still special to me. But, well, because, like, I remember even whenever I first read this might be a controversial read-through because I did not tell Mariah to do this. This is how I read it the first time. I read Shadow and Bone first, and then I read Six of Crows because I was so intrigued about, like, the story, and everyone's like, you don't even have to read Shadow and Bone if you want to read Six of Crows, which you don't. I think objectively you could read Six of Crows and Crooked Kingdom as its own duology, while King of Stars you do have to read both of the series for it, in my humble opinion. But I think you should still read Shadow and Bone. But I don't know, it really depends on, like, what kind of fantasy you're interested in reading, because I think Six of Crows is a good overall fantasy where anybody that's interested in fantasy can enjoy Six of Crows, because even Tyler's reading Six of Crows. I mean, he hasn't finished it because he's incredibly slow and he barely reads, but he loves every time he reads it. He's like, this is so good. I'm always like, why do you stop reading for months at a time? But I don't think he would personally enjoy Shadow and Bone. He liked the TV show, but it wasn't, like, anything revolutionary to him.
I just wish, like, Shadow and Bone, the trilogy, could be reworked a little bit and maybe aged up. I don't know. Because it does pretty well. Like, it has a pretty, like, solid rating on Goodreads overall. Like, it gets about 4-star ratings for every single book.
Which,
like,
I think
Shadow
is
Bone,
usually...
Storms, Rune and Risings, all about a 4-star rating.
Yeah, which is pretty good considering I feel like most, like, series, at least that are, like, trilogies like this, they're usually more critiqued and stuff like that, and they're never, like, as popular, like, all the way through. Well, I feel like Shadow and Bone is very consistent all the way through. And, like, I mean, obviously this was popular enough to be turned into, like, one of the first, like, book-tok TV shows, wouldn't you say?
I mean, it had to have gotten a lot of popularity before book-tok, before it became a show, right?
I'm not sure. I mean, I really only saw it on book-tok beforehand. Like, I never, like, ever... But I also didn't consume, like, other media, like, for books and things like that in, like, high school or even after high school. Like, I never saw this anywhere. And I just would think, personally, that if this is supposed to be, like, such a big series and stuff like that, that I would have heard about it. Because, like, even, like, Cassandra Clare's, like, The Mortal Instrument and, like, the other one called... whatever, you know, the one about, like, the angels or something.
Angels.
Cassandra Clare, she's, like, a big, like, author that I've, like, always heard about, but I've never read any of her stuff personally. But she's kind of, like, in the YA, like, universe and stuff like that. And there's other, like, books and stuff that I've always heard about and, like, surged in popularity, even if they don't have, like, an adaptation. But I never personally consumed them. While I feel like Shadow and Bone, I never even, like, heard about before TikTok.
I'm trying to remember, like, how book recommendations went when I was in school. A lot of it had to do with, like, Twilight, right? It was, like, things that your friends read.
Well, because, like, in whenever I was reading in school, I didn't have very many friends. So I would kind of just go through whatever Like I was very much like a browser. I was like, oh, this looks interesting, I'll read it and check it out of the library and things like that. Where it was never
I'm
like,
trying to think.
except for like,
Other than that, though, like it was just like word of mouth. Like social
yeah.
media wasn't super prevalent when I was in middle school, but it was also like when MySpace was, and like people weren't recommending books on MySpace that I can remember.
No, I feel like,
Music.
especially recently within these last, like, I would say like maybe like 5 years or so, since maybe like 2019, is kind of where like the resurgence of like popularizing reading has really gotten big, especially with like book-tok and things like that. Where like I feel like 2019 was also the big boom for TikTok in general, right?
Yeah, like
Late 20.
a lot of TikTok videos were getting shared on Twitter. And then I think people were slowly moving over. Anyways,
Moving on. Okay,
moving on.
back to what you were saying about books.
Yeah, I just remember in school you got it from your friends. Like you'd see your friend reading a book, and obviously mine were all like related to vampires because that was very prevalent. I don't remember reading a lot of books in high school outside of like recommended classics. Like we read Romeo and Juliet and The Crucible and The Odyssey and whatnot. I think
To Kill a
I was reading
Mockingbird.
so much. And the same with like with college is we were reading so many books that were recommended reading that I didn't have it in me to like pursue reading leisurely. So I don't know. I think that was my train of thought.
Okay, but anyways, so moving on, we can talk about Leigh Bardugo herself. So, Leigh Bardugo was actually born in Jerusalem in 1975, and she was raised in LA. So, she is specifically Jewish. We'll go over that in a second, but she has experience in copywriting, journalism, and then also makeup and special effects, which is kind of like random, but she talks about it because like all of my copies of Shadow and Bones, they have like a Q&A with Leigh Bardugo where she also goes in depth more about like writing each specific book and stuff like that, which I really love to read whenever it's like about books or authors that I really enjoy. Just getting like their mind, I think, is really interesting, or even just getting like slice of life things about like that. So like I love looking at like all the little extras that are in the Shadow and Bones. But then she also had Shadow and Bone was actually her debut novel, which I think is
That's crazy.
It's a really strong debut novel, which obviously it's not as strong as her other work, but for this being like her debut series, it is a very strong first thing out of the gate sort of thing. And then all of these books have been like nominated for awards and stuff like that. But she also has osteonecrosis. I don't know if that's how you say it, and I'm not exactly sure what it is. But I know it like causes like mobility issues and things like that, so she has to use a cane to walk sometimes, which actually inspires why Kaz uses a cane in Six of Crows, which is kind of like cool to have like that type of like representation with like disabilities and that, which I think a lot of fantasy kind of avoids.
Yeah, a lot of mainstream fantasy. They're like typical, like white porcelain. There's always a lot of like, oh, they were so fair, so blonde, very athletic. Like there's not a lot of diversity.
But
in main characters.
I feel like Shadow and Bone is pretty diverse, especially for like 2012 at the time and things like that. Because there are like Asian characters and things like that, because like within the world of the Grishaverse there is the Shuhan, which is like their Asian inspired countries. And then even whenever this was made into the TV show, the actress that plays as Alina, she's Asian as well. So they work into, I know you don't know this, Mariah, because you didn't watch the show, but they work into the show. Like, besides Alina just being criticized because she's poor, they also talk about racism a lot, because a lot of people are racist to her because she's Shu, the show, because she's Asian.
Interesting. I didn't know that they did that.
Yeah, so I think that's like a different like standpoint and stuff like that, because there are also other Asian characters within the stories, but I don't really think they face like specific like discrimination.
Which I think it makes sense given like where it is meant to be like in the world, even though it's like Ravka isn't technically Russia. There is like,
you can definitely see
Eastern Europe, that's where you have like Tibet and whatnot, and like Yugoslavia and whatnot. I'm trying to think of other countries that were part of the USSR that like dissolved, but they were,
but even like Mongolia and stuff like that, and like China are like right next to like the eastern side of Russia, obviously, so that makes sense. And then even like Fjorden is like the country that's north of Ravka, which is like Viking, sort of, I guess you could say. That's like the people that live there are like Viking inspired, which is like, that's like the main like continent that most. There's also like Perch, which is another like tiny little country that's like shown to be neutral, which is Six of Crows takes place in Ketterdam, which is capital of Perch, and that's like a little tiny island. And then there's like Noivy Zem, which I think is supposed to be, I guess, similar to like Africa, maybe, because I think that's where Jesper is supposed to be from. And then I can't, it makes me mad because I can't spoil King of Scars, because there's like another reason why like Noivy Zem is also like mentioned and things like that within King of Scars and about like a character from in this. And so we'll definitely talk about that more within like King of Scars, because I feel like it definitely talks about like racism and like whitewashing and things like that, which is, I think, something that's really refreshing to see in fantasy, because that's not something, especially in like a book-tok book. But moving on from that, we can go definitely more into that here soon. But I wanted to talk about like the quote-unquote controversies surrounding Leigh Bardugo, because
which there wasn't much.
No, the only thing that I personally saw, because like also I think too, where she's not somebody who's like super like active on social media in many ways. Like, she has like an Instagram, but it's not like here are my thoughts and opinions on everything that happens within that, which it's very much, she's the only thing that she talks about online about anything is just about like her books and publishing process and things like that, which I think is pretty refreshing. But then she does talk about like some politics and things like that. Because she is Jewish and she's from Israel, I guess back originally whenever like the Palestine-Israel, whenever like Israel was originally attacking like Palestine, like not like originally like within like 1950s and things like that. But I think there was like a surge of it, I guess, in like 2017.
I think it's like with social media, like it
Yeah.
was one of the bigger instances of it happening where we all were kind of collectively using social media, so it was getting a different kind of like publicity outside of mainstream journalism.
Yes, exactly. And so that like was, I guess I was like 2016-ish time and stuff like that. But then I couldn't see the tweets because Leigh Bardugo has deleted her Twitter, which I don't blame her. That website fucking sucks now. So I don't know when she deleted it or anything like that, but it was deleted. So I don't know like her exact response, but like some of it showed online on the Google, like you click on it and then it says like this tweet deleted, but the little summary is still there. But basically somebody this was in 2020, they originally tweeted this where they're like, how are y'all still supporting Leigh Bardugo? She's a Zionist or whatever. Then people are like, oh, she's a Zionist. And what the tweet was, where apparently someone asked her if she was a Zionist. And then they just sent a screenshot of this tweet that says, second, you're right. Israel has some big issues on the table. So does Russia and Turkey and Venezuela and the US. And that, so obviously there was another tweet before that with the context. But that tweet is no longer around, so I don't know what the original tweet said. But Leigh Bardugo then responded to that person saying that she was a Zionist, saying that apparently, quote unquote, I explicitly stated that I wasn't a Zionist because I'm not. I am a Jew. I support a free Palestine. Specifically, she has said, so that's something that's more than like what other authors has done. And then since the October 7th attack, she has posted more pro-Palestine Instagram stories and like donations to that. But I mean, she still said free Palestine in 2016, which is more than what, or I guess 2020, I think it was, she said specifically free Palestine, which
That's
is
more than what a lot of mainstream authors
are doing now. And
yeah,
after the fact, after everything that has happened, that has been much more like present on social media and things like that. And this is before it was like a bigger issue. And it makes sense that she was more aware of it too, because obviously being born in Jerusalem and stuff like that. But I think it's really interesting because she probably realizes too that even though she was born in Jerusalem, she moved, or her family moved her back to Los Angeles, California, and that's where she grew up and still lives. I think she still lives.
which is like a good thing because at least she didn't have to serve in the IDF.
Yeah. But it definitely is, it's an interesting thing to me because, like, no offense to, like, her parents and stuff, and this is all, like, 100% speculation and things like that, about, like, why they were in, like, Israel during that time period and stuff like that. I mean, she was born in the 1970s, so I think definitely a lot of, like, the media presence that's happening now, it was a lot different back then, too, where obviously they still had, like, the birthright trips and things like that, but they didn't have, I don't think it was, like, an open genocide in the way that it is Yeah, because I think, was it 2006 whenever the, like, second big push was? There was, like, a big push whenever they first moved there where they started, like, pushing out.
Yeah, so everything I've read on it, like, thus far, because, like, there was the original Nakba, which happened after World War II,
Mm-hmm.
and then Israel had, they were in Gaza,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then they left, and this is, like, the biggest, like, critique that comes from Zionists. They're like, oh, well, Israel isn't even in Gaza. They left in 2006, but they still are, like,
Yeah.
bombing with them, so it's like, okay, that's great. So instead of, like, occupying the area, you made it like an open air concentration camp.
Yeah.
So there's been a lot that's happening, but like what's happening now is like the worst since like the original Nakba,
Yes.
based on like casualties. It's really fucked.
Yeah. But obviously, I mean, she realizes that it's wrong. She says free Palestine and stuff like that. So, I mean, like, I don't think there's much more you can do to critique her on it. Where, like, I guess the only thing is that she's not, like, every day posting about Palestine and stuff like that. But it's still significantly more than, like, what other authors have been doing, like people like Sarah J. Maas and things like that who have been completely silent on it. And now I see people, like, defending Sarah J. Maas who's like, well, her mental health. That's what I saw.
What?
There was, like, a Reddit thing where it was like, so how come everyone's gonna criticize SJM, but they're not gonna criticize Leigh Bardugo? I'm like, well, one, Leigh Bardugo specifically said free Palestine. You know, like,
It's because they want to justify reading and consuming the new book. They're finding any way to like forgive and forget and just let it go because they want to practice their own form of escapism, even though I know in this book there's gonna be like a pseudo revolution.
it's gonna be like,
You know what? And I'm glad it got leaked online. I'm glad the ending got spoiled for all these fucking.
oh, did it get
choosy-ass
leaked?
motherfuckers.
I didn't know that.
Leaked and like somebody spoiled the end of it. So like if you look it up, like you can find what happens in the book.
Oh. I'm sure in the
So
end it's gonna be some central, like, thing and stuff like that. And, like, nobody here is, like, criticizing, like, what you read and things like that. But there's a difference between, like, what you read. Because Mariah loves, like, the ACOTAR series and even Crescent Cities and things like that. But it's a difference whenever you're sitting there reading it, not thinking critically about it, and then just promoting it blindly.
exactly. Like I think you can read it because it's not included in like the BDS like boycott, but don't promote it.
If you
Don't
want to read
include
it
it
in
in like your
privacy,
top
yeah.
books and like
You want to read it in the
whatever.
privacy of your own home. Nobody is sitting there criticizing. Like me personally, I love Percy Jackson. I own all the books. I will probably reread the books again because I love that series and stuff like that. Even though Rick Riordan has a problematic take, but I'm not gonna sit there and then go around and be like, you should read the Percy Jackson series now, blah blah blah. After everything that's happened with Rick Riordan's statement, even though he has like released pro-Palestine like donations and stuff like that, that's not even the bare minimum anymore because those donations aren't even getting to Palestine. So it's like frustrating because like Sarah J. Maas has actively said nothing and went on a birthright trip back in who knows how many years ago, you know? And so I think if you want to consume quote unquote problematic authors, because like that can be taken in so many ways, nobody is telling you can't. But the issue everyone has is that you're sitting there promoting it and telling other people to read it. Everybody already knows who Sarah J. Maas is if they're on any type of book-tok. You don't need to go around and give her promotion. That's like going around promoting like Fourth Wing. Like you don't need to do that. People already know it. They got it. That's like the biggest series. And I 100% bet you this next week or next 2 weeks whenever Crescent City comes out, I promise you that book is going to be on the New York Times bestseller. She does not need your promotion. That's like bootlicking to the extreme.
It's very strange. Book-tok is a very strange place. I think I say this in most podcasts, but then we talk about it and just analyze the social media, I guess, community that is book-tok that talk about like fantasy reads.
Mm-hmm.
It's just wild, like the people that consume it and like the whole mentality around being so staunchly like apolitical and like defending their favorite authors through and through because they like relate to these characters. I don't know. They must have it in them some like I don't know how to describe it. Like they're like trying to justify their own biases.
Yeah, and it's
through
like
the authors, like projecting their own insecurities and their lack of political education. And there's like, well, no, they're fine because of X, Y, and Z, but in reality, they probably feel that about. This is all hypothetical.
Yeah.
It's just what I think.
We don't talk to any of these people. We don't really talk to like other book talkers like that specifically.
No, we only talk to nonfiction book talkers.
Those are
like,
the only, yeah. Like, that are, which I mean, like, so, like, if any other book talker has, like, their, like, opinion and stuff like that, they want to discuss it with us, I'm sure we're totally open to, like, an open discussion. But it's also, like, the fact is that, like, people read so many books within a year, and I think the fact that more people is reading is great, even if you're reading disgusting reverse harem dark romances and things like that, which is, like, I'm not gonna critique that, because at least you're reading. That's more than just, like, sitting there scrolling through social media, and nobody's critiquing that. It's just the fact that you're gonna sit here and justify it and sit here and be like, well, I cannot critically consume what I read whenever everything that you read is inherently political, whether or not you want to sit there and believe it or not. And I'd argue that books are one of the most political forms of media, especially within recent history.
Well, there's a reason that there's, like, banned book lists, and, like, the US government will do literally anything in their power to ban, like, gay or queer or, like, critical race theory, any, like, books have those tropes. Like, there's a reason, because reading is powerful, and it can, like, motivate people to want to learn about history. Like, oh, this inspired this, I want to learn more about X, Y, and Z. So, I don't know.
Yeah.
Except George Orwell. That man deserves to be banned.
Well, it's crazy because, like, it's banned because, like, it's funny because, like, I feel like a lot of, like, left-wing people, they read it and they're like, oh, this is criticizing capitalism. And then, like, right-wing people read it and they're like, oh, this is criticizing communism. Where it's like, what? If your message could get misconstrued either way, that's a weak story, in my opinion.
Exactly.
But I also think a lot of the right-wing people that are like, this is just like 1984, communism is, I don't think they actually read the book either, though.
No. They probably watched, like, a movie, which I did see when I was walking through Barnes & Noble. I don't think I told you this. In, like, the main science fiction aisle that you, like, walk through, there is a new, like, retelling of 1984 that some woman author wrote.
Okay.
Why would you want to do that? I don't know. But they were like, oh, they made it more, like, contemporary. Like,
does it need to be contemporary?
It exists, though.
Okay.
Because I had to do a double take. Sorry, you can take that out. I forgot to tell you.
Moving on to actual, I guess, like, criticism. I looked at, like, the 1-star reviews on Goodreads, which is only 1% of Shadow and Bones gave it 1 star. I didn't look at what the percentages of 2-star is, but I feel like 1 star, like, the people that either DNF'd it or, like, absolutely hated it, where, like, I feel like 2-star you can usually find, like, some type of redeeming qualities within it. But the 1 star, only 1% on Goodreads gave it a bad review, and all of the bad reviews that I saw, they were just, like, hating on Alina as a character, which to me kind of felt misogynistic. Because to me personally, I don't feel like she's any different from, like, your Harry Potter, your Percy Jackson, and things like that, where just because she's a woman, it's more like she's a bland character, or, like, because she's not confident in most of the book, just because, like, and I think that's something that I think is kind of important to showcase too, that I feel like, especially if I did it came out in, like, 2012 and stuff like that, and reading this as, like, a middle schooler, high schooler, I would find myself in Alina, where she is, like, an unconfident person, where she's not, like, advocated as, like...
But she's also, like, a teenager, isn't she?
I think
she's
so.
Really
she's in the army, so I guess I'm assuming that technically, I guess they'd be, like, fresh... I don't know what the draft age is in Ravka. I know it's supposed to be younger, and... I kind of imagine her as, like, 17, freshly 18, because, like,
I can see that.
I don't know I know the draft age is supposed to be, like, younger in Ravka, because they're, like, constantly at war with, like, the Shuhan and Firda and stuff like that. But I kind of see her as, like, freshly 18, and then, like, in Six of Crows, it's insane to me that Kaz is supposed to be, like, 16. Like, that man is 25 years old. I'm sorry. He is not
really
16. He's old. That man is
25. So, yeah.
I don't know either. And so, like, but, like, so that's why I feel like that's something too, where, like, I can see that being a criticism, where it's like, oh, she's 15, 16, but also, like, 18-year-olds are not confident people, especially if you're going through like this. And of course she's gonna be, like, critiquing herself and stuff like that, because who's not critiquing themselves?
Well, and her and Mal were both orphans.
Yeah, Like, she didn't have, like, a parent to, like, teach her, like, things like that. They have, Anna Kuya or something, I think her name is, which is, like, the orphanage woman and stuff like that taught him, like, some things. But there's also, like, within not having, like, parental love and things like that, it's harder to, I think, be, like, a positive influence on yourself. But, I mean, Alina Starkov and Mal Orstev, whatever his last name is, proletariat kings and queens, huh?
You know, their dynamic, now that you said that it was written in 2012, it does remind me a lot of, like, the Katniss and Gale, or whatever the two characters in, like, Divergent, like, that same kind of dynamic.
Four and Chris.
Yeah, I see it now.
Yeah, so it makes sense for the time, even if I don't necessarily agree with it. And I wonder, like, if Leigh Bardugo could change anything about it. But then I wonder if something like that was changed about it, would it have received, like, the popularity within it itself? Because, I mean, like, you think about, like, young adult novels back in that age, what was marketable? Love triangles. So, of course, you're gonna have the, like, regular guy, and then you're gonna have the mysterious, I don't know, villain.
Darkling, he doesn't even have a name. This Darkling.
He does have a name.
But yeah, but not.
You don't find out about it until the last book. I think the last book is whenever you find out what his name is. But I mean, from what, like, Alina and Mal experience, where they experience, like, lots of hardship. I mean, drafted as soon as you're of age to be drafted into a war for the rich people and things like that. And even, like, whenever Alina, so I guess we'll specifically go into spoilers now for, I guess, all three of the books, but I highly recommend them. So
if you could, yeah, I was gonna say, if you can tell, Kristen highly recommends this book. I gave them a 4 across the board. Like, they're very solid.
Mine are high 4s. I gave Ruin and Rising a 5-star my first time reading it, but on the reread I ended up giving it 4.5. But I mean, I think these two are 4.5. Storm is a 4.75 in my eyes, and there's a reason why that is, but it's technically a spoiler, so I won't say why. But this is the one. Oops. Siege and Storm is the one, even though people be preying on its downfall. It is the lowest rated.
They're Nikolai haters.
It is the lowest rated. But I mean, it's only 3.82 is for Siege and Storm versus.
As they're weak. They're weak. They don't understand literature.
Sorry, my books are falling. Okay, but anyways, going specifically into, like, the spoiler zone. Book fell again.
I thought it was Kaz knocking it over.
Oh, speaking of, we didn't even talk about how my cat is named for Kaz in the Six of Crows universe. So not this specific one, which Kaz doesn't even show up in this, but my black cat Kaz is named after Kaz, one of the main characters in the Six of Crows duology. Just because whenever we met our cat Kaz, he was very aloof, very mysterious, and we were like, oh, wow, that's just like Kaz, because my boyfriend was reading Six of Crows at the time. And now that we met Kaz, I feel like he's violent, like Kaz in the book, so the similarities are still there.
I honestly thought you were going to name him Jasper. I thought that's what it was going to be.
I don't think Tyler cares about Jasper's character as much as Kaz's character. I agree, because I do think Kaz, like, not to be like everyone else, but I do think Kaz is my favorite character in the Six of Crows duology. Because, I mean, it's hard to beat him. He is quite literally perfect. But anyways, moving on to spoiler zones for specifically Ruin and Rising, Shadow and Bone, Siege and Storm. I think it's a very revolutionary story in a positive way, even though I think the ending could be improved on, because it does stay in, like, the bourgeois having power. But it gets a pass because Nikolai Landstoff, I think he is my favorite Grishaverse character. I love him more than Kaz. I love him more than anyone else. I mean, I think Nikolai is a class traitor. I think Nikolai is a class traitor. Controversial. In ways.
In the good way.
In the good way. Where he's bourgeois, but he actually listens to the proletariat, and he works within the proletariat too, where he, in Siege and Storm, you meet him as, I don't even know how to say it. Do you?
What What does he call himself? Like a pirateer or something?
A privateer.
Profiteer?
Privateer.
Yeah, privateer.
Um,
Where, like, you can tell that he doesn't want anything to do with the crown. Like,
he has to
until he like is obligated
Yeah.
for like a variety of reasons. But yeah, I don't
See,
know. I haven't read Crooked Kingdom, so I can't attest
You
to
have read
his.
Crooked Kingdom.
It's
Get
not.
it?
So what is it called? King of Scars. I always
Yeah.
get those confused. King of Scars and Ruling Wolves.
Sturmhond is his privateer name. I love how he got his name. I'm sure you don't remember how he got his name, do you?
No.
Okay. Well, because like they kind of have like their own language where they speak Ravkan, I guess, in Ravka. And so like some of their stuff is like pseudo like Russian. Like they say like Moy Svarchek or something to like the czar, like the king and stuff like that. Basically, how Alina thought he got his name because they call him Sorbachka, Sorbachki or something like that. I'm sorry, I don't really know Russian. But they call him Puppy. That's like translates to puppy in English, which is like a cute little nickname because like you don't really see him and he's like the youngest brother. So they kind of like write him off as just being like a little guy. And like Strumhond in like I guess Rodkin or whatever can like translate to being like like the wind of the wolves or something, like storm of the wolves or something like that, because like you would think because of like like ocean storms and things like that, because he is a privateer and he stays on the true sea a lot. So that's where you kind of think it comes from. But then you later find out that he like got onto like a Fjordan ship and he ended up cutting off the Fjordan captain's fingers and feeding them to his dog. And it's like something to do with that. And so it's kind of like showing like that he was like violent and vicious when necessary, but then he still has like genuine heart. And he actually cares about, like, his people within that. He's definitely somebody that actually cares about, like, the well-being of Ravka.
Which is significantly different than you see from his father or his mother or his brother.
Yes.
Like, they're not on the same level. I don't even think the Apparat, the religious person, I don't think he cares about the people's as much as, like, his own, like, moral superiority and, like, maintaining religious vows or something.
Well, because there's even so many parts with Siege and Storm. I think that's why it's my favorite, is because it does focus on Nikolai so much. And I mean, Ruin and Rising has some good, not even in Shadow and Bones. Like, get that book out of here for real. That's why this series should be a duology. But focusing on Nikolai and stuff like that, where he actually did fight in the army and stuff like that, and then eventually in Siege and Storm, whenever, or like the beginning of Ruin and Rising, at the end of Siege and Storm, what happens is the Darkling is able to take over because his brother basically gave him like the right of way to walk right into the Grand Palace and stuff like that. So then the Darkling kills off all, like, Nikolai's brother dies, but then the king and the queen get away because he wants to save his family and stuff like that. He's very much an inventor and stuff like that, and he originally did serve in like the army. And they say that like the princes or whatever have to like serve within the army because like they're constantly at war, and I think it's just put on like a good show for like the bourgeois, or like to show like, oh, we're bourgeois, we should have power because look, we're just like you guys sort of thing. But it's kind of like all for show, because they mentioned that Vasily, which is Nikolai's brother, he just like stayed on like the general's tent or whatever, but then like Nikolai actively was like out on the front lines with his people. And like there's like a scene where he like has a conversation with like one of the soldiers that is there. It's like, oh, like, hey, I remember when me and you were like killing those Fjordan men, like just on the front lines together. And so it's actually very much like personable to him within the war and things like that. But then there's like another scene wherever he's like talking about where like Alina's like, I don't want to just like risk like everybody and things like that, and like risk like these people that are not like actually like people that should be risked and stuff like that. Like she's very anti like war and like self-sacrifice and things like that. Nikolai is like, well, I'll be on the front lines dying with them. It's like so true, Nikolai. He's like the good class traitor in that way, where he's actually willing to die for the cause and doing what's right. And that's why I can't wait till you read King of Scars, because we can go into it so much more too about like what happens within that series.
I know. I've been meaning to sit down and read it, but because it's a physical book, the texts are so small.
Yeah.
I'm very spoiled having the e-reader.
Yeah. But I mean, I know like Mariah's a big Darkling defender too, because that's kind of like one of the most controversial characters within this whole series is the Darkling.
I don't know why. Truly, like I think back on it, I'm like, I mean, aside from like expanding the folds, which was like not great, I don't see it as a complete net.
I think it's a lot more. I know a lot of people criticize Alina and the Darkling being paired up because he is like this ancient being sort of thing, and I mean Alina is anywhere from 16 to 18.
Right? Don't they live long
regardless? They don't live. I think like it depends on how powerful you are. The Darkling says so. Like the more powerful ones, so like Bagra is very powerful, and the Darkling is very powerful. So they've lived for thousands of years. But then other Grisha might live only a couple hundred at most. I think maybe 200.
Which is still longer than the general public. And I just like to think that Darkling maybe saw like a lot of rises and falls in empires, and now he's being like controlled by another empire. So maybe he's just fed up with it.
I mean, he does say that. I think a lot of people were criticized that him trying to pursue a relationship with Alina because she's anywhere from 16 to 18, depending on how you view this book and things like that. But to me, I don't feel like that's a fair criticism because people will criticize the Darkling, but then Rizan, whatever the frick his name is.
Timlin. Like
they're book-tok's boyfriends. Like
Credence.
Yeah, where he's actually like a 40-year-old man. And I don't feel like it's sad because like the way that he like individualizes Alina and stuff like that, and I think it's sad because a lot of it I think can fall on like Bagra and like how she raised him and stuff like that. And she like it's so sad because like even in Rising she talks about like how much regret she has for doing that and stuff like that because she didn't realize like she like talks about how she like stroked his pride too much, and she thought that like whenever she was teaching him like about like Morzova or whatever the guy's name is, like he's like all of his like creations and stuff like that, she was teaching him to be as like warnings to not get too powerful and too greedy and stuff like that, because that's like one of the big overarching themes within this is like what kind of like that quote, but it's like what is infinite, the greed of man is like one of the big messagings within this and stuff like that. And I think that's where like the Darkling can get criticized is because he got too greedy.
Yeah, he definitely was just like searching for like power, and like low-key created a power vacuum by invading the palace when he did.
Yeah, and I think that was intentional.
But I also feel like his relationship with Alina is less romantic and more so like him seeing somebody who was also in a very similar position, who was like had this power like thrusted upon them. Mm-hmm. And like expectations I imagine were super super high for him when he first like came into being, because who knows like how the rules and what they didn't have the same kind of like serving. Didn't they have like Grisha that would go around and see if they had like potential to be
they would test them. That was only after the Darkling that was only after the Darkling took power within the little palace and stuff like that before, because before the thing is that a lot of the Grisha did not have a place to go. They didn't have like a homeland and stuff like that, where like in the Shu they would experiment on their Grisha, and then like the Fjordans are like the religious zealots of the world, and they would just kill anybody that showed any like inkling of the small silence and things like that, where they were like more the witch hunters and things like that.
Yeah, it gave like Puritanism.
Yeah, which they kind of go into that more I think in Six of Crows with like Matthias's relationship with Nina and stuff like that, so we can definitely talk about that more then. But the Darkling wanted to make a safe haven for Grisha, and I think his problem was that I think because Ravka was not necessarily the most like open to Grisha, because they weren't. A lot of people are still like prejudiced against Grisha and view them as like witches and stuff like that because they are religious. But he chose like Ravka because they were like the most open-minded with it. But then the problem is that he did it at the expense of wanting to, I don't even know how to like describe, like taking a land that was like not guaranteed or already occupied within like the Ravkan culture and things like that. And then he tried to integrate like the Grisha culture within that. And he did it over years and years because he worked for multiple kings as like separate darklings, because that's like one of the main things too, where I think that's why Alina did not originally follow him, because she found out he was lying to her, where he said like a different darkling created like the fold and stuff like that, and that he wanted to destroy it, whenever in reality he could have just been like, hey, I'm trying to make a safe space for like the Grisha, because like we don't have a safe space. Like even like the other Grisha that come from other countries, and talk about how like one character in the third book, Harshaw, he's not really that relevant throughout the series. I'm only gonna like slightly mention him. He talked about how he had a brother that had Inferni powers, which is a part of the Squallers like subsection. I'm getting really deep into like the lore of like the Corporal Nick and like how like each of them fall under categories, but his brother had like summoning powers to like summon fire or whatever, and so then his family like got burnt at the stake basically because of that. And that was in like Noivizem, which is like not even like as like problematic and stuff like that. So like these people don't have safe spaces to go to, and that's like what the Little Palace became. Was whenever they found Grisha, they were able, I think in Ravka, they only did specific testing, and then, like, in other countries, if they made it to the little Palace, it was more like refugees.
It's just sad because that was, like, the only place for them to, like, seek refuge. Like, it was nice, and I think a lot of, like, working class people throughout the countryside would get upset because they knew that like Grisha got treated better than like they did, but in reality, one, they don't have anywhere else to go. Like they are forced to go and work for this empire and like essentially like perform like colonialism or whatever they need at like the face of their war. Whereas like they were like misdirected with their anger, with it being the Grisha rather than it being at the crown.
Yeah, and I think that's like, especially where there's like a lot of like separation, where they talk about a lot with like the first and second army. So, like the first army is like the regular people, non-magical people, and they're not even technically considered magical either. It's like the small science, so it's more of like a scientific, like,
it's like alchemy.
Yes,
almost.
Yeah, where it's a lot more like science and reality based, versus like someone can snap their fingers and like make something happen within that. And so there's kind of a lot more scientific aspect of it. So I think that's what kind of makes it a more unique magic system than maybe others that are just like, oh, I wave my wand and I do this, or I just like can will like water to move or something, versus like the way that it's described, like especially with like the fabricators or whatever they're called specifically, like how they're specifically more in like the material links and stuff like that, how they specifically work in like metalworking and glassworking and things like that. And I do think with how like, because, like, the way this wrapped up is not a Marxist revolution in any way, and I don't really think that the Darkling is a Marxist in any way, because I think his ideas were Grisha superiority instead of equality for all, and I think that's kind of where, like, I think I take main issue with what he does. Not that I think...
Yeah, it was not, like, a liberation.
Yeah.
That he had.
It was to basically make the Grisha more powerful and stronger than regular people and things like that, which is an unfair advantage, which I understand, like, your people are being discriminated against and attacked and things like that, but that doesn't mean that they should have the right to start oppressing other groups of people, which I don't think a lot of people understand, I guess, within, like, that universe and stuff like that, because the Darkling does have significantly more Grisha followers than Alina ends up having within that, but there are still some, like, Grisha, like Toila and Tamar, where they follow Strumhold, and then they actually are religious people, and so then they end up following Alina as well, where they want more like, I don't know how to describe, like, liberation for everyone rather than just or. And that's why I know, like, Mal and, like, the Grisha and stuff, they wanted Alina to be queen and stuff like that, because not only for the first army and like the regular people, it would be a peasant woman becoming queen, but then it also is a Grisha becoming queen. So it's like, that's why. But then Alina did not want that power thrusted upon herself. She did not want any of that.
Chaiki, don't blame her.
Yeah.
Like, she's just some like rando orphan that gets like this power, and they're like, you need to be queen now. And she's like,
actually, I don't want that. She's like, I just want to be a regular old girl. And they're like, but you're not a regular old girl. And it's like, I know. And that's why I feel like I can understand like criticism for Alina, because like she's always like, she always says like sacrificing for the greater good, but her only idea for sacrificing for the greater good is her being martyred instead of like doing something, you know? Like, she's
Like,
always
she gives
trying to
you the bigger
die.
picture.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, I get it, girly, but, like, sometimes Nikolai is not that bad. I'm telling you.
Yeah, that was always strange, right? Because she was supposed to marry, like, Nikolai, like, hypothetically.
Yeah, like, he proposed to her multiple times, and she said no every time because she was too in love with Mal. Mal, he's nice enough, I guess. Like, first book, he's kind of a dickhead. I don't know, he's always kind of a dickhead, and I understand, like, I get
He's
it.
dickhead through all of it, and I'm pretty sure that he fucked Zoya.
He
Like,
did.
99%
Yeah.
sure. Yeah, we, like, ended up confirming that that happened, and it really hurt Alina, and he's just like...
He's like, sorry, I didn't notice you until you got your magical powers. It's like, you've known her your whole life. And he goes, I did notice you. I had uncomfortable... He says, like, in, like, Runa Rising, he's like, I did notice you, and I did have, like, impure thoughts. But I felt wrong because I was your best friend. Girl, shut the hell up.
Okay.
No, for real. Like, what are you talking about? And it just, like, that's why Mal, like, infuriates me. And I feel like Mal is not that bad. Like, comparatively, there are definitely worse men in the world, specifically.
But in this world,
But in
I
this,
don't know.
I just know if I was Alina, I would have been hanging out with Nikolai. I would have taken that Landstoff Emerald, and I'd be flashing it around. And that's why I think I relate. I think Zoya is one of my favorite characters in this whole series. And
But she has grown on me a lot. Even though I haven't read the last two books.
the last
like,
two
even
books,
she's in Crooked Kingdom. Like, okay.
I think you will love her in the King of Scars duology, because that's really whenever I fell in love with her. And honestly, I think you're too hard on her, because I think she's just like me for real. Like, she's a bitch, and she knows she's a bitch. And she doesn't try to act like she's, like, she acts like she's better than everyone, but in, like, not ways that I think people just feel bad because she is so, like, pretty and stuff like that. Not that I'm, like, saying, like, looks wise. I just know personality-wise, whenever you exude confidence in that way, people view you negatively. Where she knows what she wants, and she knows how it is, you know? And, like, I love the arc that she has in, King of Scars, which is something that I'll talk about in this, because, like, a lot of the times, Mora, I don't know what the hell his name is. I still don't, it's like Morozov, you know, the guy, Ilya Morozov, the guy that made the stag and the sea whip and the phoenix.
Oh, yes, like the main, like, alchemist, like one of like, the original Grisha, whatever.
One of the things that he said was because, like, one thing that it talks about a lot in this is because, like, and that's one thing that, like, towards the end of the book, like, Lena's like, we should not have such distinct separations within the Grisha, which is, like, they have, like, in the beginning of all of the books, I'll go off the page, even though it'll be backwards, but, like, they have, like, the Grisha, like, individually section out in the order of, like, importance. So, like, the corporal...
There's, like, a hierarchy within the little complex.
Yes. And so, like, the corporaliki, I hate saying these names, but that's, like, the Heartrenders and the Healers. Those are, like, and even, like, within the Darklings, like, hierarchy, he actively, like, prioritizes the Healers and the Heartrenders more than he does any other. Like, all of his right-hand people are all Heartrenders, which are, like, the highest ones, which are, like, they're viewed as, like, the most powerful in ways, which I think is discounts so much other, like, how important, like, the other Grisha are and stuff like that. Like, trying to tell me that David is not as powerful as, like, Tamar or Tolia is actually crazy to me, because I think the ideas and stuff with the materialiki that, like, the things that David creates within the series are so important to, like, how much they do and stuff like that, versus, like, the Heartrenders, where I think they're just more showy with, like, how they use the small science.
Showy, and, like, from, like, a battle standpoint, I get it. Like, if you have to pick who's gonna defend you in battle, like, for hand-to-hand combat, you're not gonna pick, like, a fabricator.
But even then, the fabricators...
Or a tailor, but even then, like, tailors are crazy.
The tailors, like, that's so, like, the espionage part of having, like, a tailor and stuff like that, but tailors actually fall under the Heartrenders, so maybe not a good comparison, Mariah. But, like, I mean, like, summoners with, like, Zoya and stuff like that, with how, like, they're able to use, like, the wind and stuff like that, and, like, use that to, like, push people away from you.
Or like the tide makers.
Yeah, the tide makers. Like, that's just
cool.
yeah, like being able to like control like the water and things like that. And I do think that it's like that's another thing too, where it causes like separation within like the Darklings ranks and stuff like that, where like the lower class like fabricators and stuff like that, they're not like oh, well, we're not as relevant to the Darkling, even though David comes up with some amazing things to like empower the Darkling and empower Alina with like their blast powders and stuff like that, where just because they're working behind the scenes within it doesn't not make them powerful within it. Like, David is also one of my favorite characters. I love him so much. And
there's a reason for that.
Because he's just like me too, for real.
I want to see his rams for.
Yeah, because my boy is definitely autistic. There's so many times where they'd be like talking to him, and he's just like, so anyways, about fabrication. They're like, bro, could you make it any more?
Communism.
Yeah. No, literally. But it's like, can you make it any more obvious? And I don't know if like I didn't see anything about Leigh Bardugo like specifically saying that he was like autistic coded or anything in so many ways. But the way that he acts and talks and stuff like that is just like so like direct and like nothing where he's like he does not understand social cues like at all, because like there's like a scene where like Alina talks about like burning some of his journals and he's like, are you joking? Because I cannot tell you're joking. And it's like, me too, for real. Where like you
he can't even pick up again like the Taylor liking him,
flirting with him or anything like that, where he's just like completely oblivious to like outside things like that. And I think he's such a sweet character, even though
he's a good one for you.
And I think like that's one thing that like if you're not even into the plot, I think Leigh Bardugo has beautiful character work. She writes amazing characters. And that's why whenever people to me are like criticizing like Alina for like being bland and stuff like that, I feel like she's not even like, she is bland in the way that like your stereotypical like 2012 main character is bland. Like, you know, like how like even like Katniss is not very like.
I also think it's like adults reading this, we're going to view it as being more bland.
It's juvenile.
It's definitely not us that are supposed to be the ones that are reading it.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's important to like pull yourself back out of the immersion and like understand that like maybe you as like a 25-year-old aren't going to relate to it, but
a 15
that doesn't mean like I'm like how like once Henry is old enough, I think he would really like this story because it's good. It's like a story that anybody of any age can read.
Yes, and that's something too where it's like, even though I think Alina is bland, because especially you think about that time frame of when young adult novels are published, where they're very much like, oh, like your main character needs to be able to be projected on by who's ever reading it. And I think that's something that a lot of young adult novels did back in that time. So there's no way you can really criticize it for it, because they're so like, oh, well, you have to make sure that your main character can be imprinted on by the reader so they can really imagine themselves within the story, which is how I think Alina can be criticized in ways, but I don't think it's a strong enough criticism, because I do think she has a personality within herself where she's funny and she's kind and she's genuinely just like a nice person that doesn't want to be the chosen one, quote unquote.
I'm trying to think if there's anything else. You summed it up real good.
Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
There's not. The thing is that there are like a lot of like political things and stuff like that, but I do think it's hard to only like talk about the one political parts within this, because of how you'll end up reading the other two series, and they kind of all. So I feel like the King of Scars will duology, whenever we talk about those, that'll be our big like overarching like critique of the politics within the series. And I do think that those are actually more political than this series is.
I could probably see. It seems like in Six of Crows we get a little bit more like insight into like corruption and government and whatnot, and even these like it's no Babel.
No, yeah, but it's not trying to be Babel.
But it's good, and like it's not bad. There's a lot of diversity in later books, and even this, I don't think it's like
there is
not it could be better, but for being from 2012, I think it's pretty good.
I mean, there's there's LGBTQ characters in this, with Nadia and Tamar having their relationship in this book. In the last book, at least, is referenced where they kiss directly within the page and stuff like that. So, I mean, for 2012, having queer representation, and then even, I believe, I don't know. Never mind. I won't say it because I don't want to. It's like a reveal in King of Scars. So, but other than that, I mean, it's a really good, fun story that I think that anybody can read and they can find like characters to relate to, because it is a diverse cast in like personalities, but then also it does become more diverse within Six of Crows. I think is really diverse, especially even though there's more like LGBTQ plus IA representation and things like that. And I think from something being written, I mean, over 10 years ago, it holds a lot more weight, and I'm sure it probably meant a lot more back in 2012 whenever you were reading these verses. Reading them now, it's so casual, so you're like, of course.
I think this would be like the perfect book if you are somebody who wants to like read something with your kid, but you also want to find a way to talk about like bigger like political concepts, but maybe you don't know how to like introduce it without just like coming out and like, oh, let's talk about X, Y, and Z genocide or like exploitation. Like this you could use as like a stepping stone with your kids.
Especially, I think like
middle
grade, yeah.
There's no smut in this. Like,
I think the only thing is like a little bit, it's like suggestive in Ruin and Rising, and like it's kind of suggested throughout where like it's implied.
It's like a fade to black.
Yeah, it's not anything where it's like that. It's definitely just more like, oh, they implied that they had like relations together, where like they're only gonna know what happened between them if they're aware of like what sex is anyways.
Which, I mean, this might be like my parenting hot take, but it's like sex isn't a bad thing.
No.
Most people do it at some point, and it shouldn't be like a moralizing issue. So I don't see a problem with the way that it was presented in this book. I don't think it's inappropriate.
I think like especially, I think anybody that's like 11, 12 plus, I think this is a good series for them to read. Even, I don't know, Six of Crows is pretty violent. The only thing that I feel like a little controversial.
Maybe hold off, but even then I would probably still like middle school or like in high school. Like I think that would be like a decent age range.
Yeah, I think definitely middle school. I think I was definitely reading worse stuff, to be honest, with the unrestricted internet access, so I think it's definitely different. But I do think this is one of the best like consistent young adult novels that I feel like actually has like something where it doesn't talk down on the reader and stuff like that, which I know can be like that can be a criticism of young adult where like it's too kiddie. Where I read these for the first time as an adult and reread these last week, and they still mean a lot to me. And I could say that for the entirety of the Grishaverse. Like, I love every single one of them. But, I mean, I don't even know what else to say. Just, like,
anything else to say
they're
about them?
They're not perfect books, and there's definitely plenty you can criticize about. But I do think that especially if you're younger and you're trying, I think this is a great book to get, like, middle school kids back into reading. Because apparently there's, like, the whole discourse with, like, middle schoolers being in Sephora and, like, obsessed with skincare and things like that.
Which I don't know if you want to include this. I don't really understand why people are so mad that there's, like, kids going into Sephora. Like, I remember going around, like, Macy's and whatnot as, like, a middle schooler because your parents, like, drop you off at the mall. And you just, like, walk around and you look at Spencer's and you look in, like, the back room. You're like, oh, my God, hee, hee, hee. Yeah. Like, this isn't anything new. I think they're also, like, a lot of places are closing down. So what
kids don't have anywhere to hang out is the problem. But I think the main, like, only criticism that I could see and that I, like, understand is that these kids are into skincare so much.
Yeah, that is a problem. Like, you should not be using retinol when you're 12.
Exactly, yes. And that's, like, I think the main criticism of it, because, like, they're going into Sephora, and, like, to be honest, everyone's like, oh my God, all these kids are in the Drunk Elephant section. I don't even know what Drunk Elephant is, to be honest.
It's a really expensive skincare brand, but even if they're in the Drunk Elephant section, like, how is that affecting your shopping experience? Like, if they're not, bothering you? I know, like, kids can be annoying, like, they're at the age where they're, like, learning how to be their own person. Like, that's just part of growing up. But, like, mind your business. Yeah. Like, let them do whatever. And it's if they feel grown up and cool, like,
it's not the kids' fault that they're there either. It's the parents' fault, to be real. Like, you're a parent. You should be taking your kid to the library at that age. You should not be dropping them off at Sephora. And, like, be with your kids. Spend time with them as much as you can. I know it's hard under the late stage of capitalism. But this is a series that you can have your kids be reading instead of...
Yeah, if you don't want your kids at Sephora buying skincare, maybe consider reading Leigh Bardugo's Six of Crows trilogy.
It's Shadow and Bone trilogy.
I said the wrong one, didn't I?
Yeah, it's Six of Crows. Which, objectively, like, overall, I think Six of Crows is a better series than this. But I think this is such a great basis for a beautiful world that Leigh Bardugo has constructed. And I think it is great that you can make it so diverse, and like it's a good foundation. And I think that's anything that's like with a diverse fantasy world that you want to have, it needs a good foundation, and Shadow and Bone does that for the Grishaverse, unlike other book-tok fantasies.
Oh, my bangs again. We need an outro.
Yeah. But anyways,
thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I'm sure our next episode is probably going to be on the Six of Crows duology, if all things go according to plan. But if not, he might get a surprise backlogged episode that we have,
which we only have one. But anyways, yeah, that's Shadow and Bone. We'll see you with one of my favorite duology. This is like my month of reading. Like, we're talking about my series. Because we were going to do Mariah's series, but unfortunately Mariah has a thing for problematic authors. So
it's not happening anymore, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. We're just not going to promote them.
Yeah.
You know, but if you've listened this far and you have books that you don't think are talked about enough, like, let us know. I would love to know more books in book series, maybe outside of book-tok.
One book series that I do want to do that I haven't read, and I know you haven't read either, is the Cruel Prince trilogy. Because
I see it all the time.
From my understanding is that it's similar to Shadow and Bone, but it's enemies to lovers.
Well, maybe we should check it out.
But yeah, that's all. Goodbye.